Hi, we are Craig and Gina Morgan of Blended Together Forever, and we are excited that you've joined us on our podcast. I'm going to let Gina tell you a little bit about our family and why we are doing this.
Well, we met 27 years ago on a blind date. And back then it was a real blind date because there was no social media, no Facebook, no cell phones.
Yeah.
It was a real blind date.
I couldn't check her out.
Yeah, vice versa here. So the journey began. We did not think that we would ever, or I didn't, I'm not going to speak for you,
Well, me either.
that I would ever love again, even consider going out.
Yep.
Trust and hurt was a real issue with me. And so after dating 3 years off and on, we married, and that's been nearly 24 years ago.
Right.
Be 24 years in January. So we blended his, mine, and ours. We have 6 boys, 1 girl, now 2 grandchildren.
And a third on the way.
And a third on the way.
That's
so
right.
here to give you hope that this can be done. And
Exactly.
through all the bumps in the road, and we had a lot, that just not to give up. That's the secret. You don't give up, and God will get you through it. And we are happy we didn't.
True. We when we met, Gina had 4 boys, and I had a boy and a girl. And
Right.
like Gina said, we had both gone through the pain of rejection, and so we came with some baggage initially at our relationship. So,
Yeah.
so it was kind of on, off, on, off, on, off for a long time. And but we are literally proof that a blended family can work, and you can beat the odds, because we know that marriage is difficult to begin with. It's even a little more difficult the second time around because of some other factors that have already occurred. In our case, we had both gone through a divorce.
Right.
And so we were both hurt, and as Gina said, very guarded.
Very.
But we know people that have lost a spouse,
Yeah.
and then they've remarried, and that creates a different kind of a blended family, but it's still a blended family. And so we'll talk through some of the issues that face different types of blended families. There's not one cookie cutter model that fits all sizes and shapes, is there?
Yes,
It's
that's right.
different.
They're
So,
all different, right? And, as you well know, in a blended family, the honeymoon comes at the end. So that's something to look forward to. When we married, we hit the ground running with 7 kids and all of their activities, and some were little all the way up to 10 to 12 years old. So we had a lot of activities, and we hit the ground running. There was no honeymoon. So the end did finally come when the last one graduated from high school, and we did finally start our honeymoon 19 years later. So that's what you have to look forward to.
Let's talk about the composition of our family. So when we met, you were 33.
Yes,
Okay, I was 38. I'm 5 years older.
right.
The oldest was Christopher. He was 10, I
Yes.
believe, at the time. So literally, your boys went from 10 down to 2.
Right.
All right, and my kids, Justin and Casey, they were like 5 and 3, and then, so that was the composition. Is like every 2 years. 6 of them were male, of course, 1 female,
Right.
and she's right in the middle, so
Yeah.
she had be tough to deal with. All
Don't
the
feel sorry for her. She was
Yeah,
tough.
She was. Yep. I probably overprotected her, or, daddy's little girl. And we all know those stories. But anyway, so now, 23 years later, Christopher is 37
About to be 37.
this year.
And the baby is about to be 25.
Exactly. So
Yep.
we have made it. Why don't we tell just a few stories of our journey? Maybe from the beginning, some things that we remember, to the middle stages of some stories we remember, to where we are today.
Okay.
And I think can give some perspective on different seasons in your blended family. So why don't we start at the beginning? What's something at the very first that we remember? Sorry about some good things too.
You know which one I was going to say.
Yeah, I don't know, and I'm sure there was more than one.
The
Which
family
one?
vacation in Myrtle Beach.
Oh gosh.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead. Tell that story.
Go ahead.
That is a classic.
Well, one of our first family vacations that we went to in Myrtle Beach, we were going to go all play golf. And so Craig thought it'd be a good idea if it was him and his kids against me and my kids. So that didn't work out too good. So
No.
more the kids probably didn't realize it. It was the more I think we were the ones that got so competitive. And the kids, I don't even know if it went right over their head, but it didn't with us. So we learned real quick, probably not a good idea to play games like that.
And I think perspective is key right here, because at the time, I naturally thought, well, your kids would rather be with you because there's loyalty, there's history.
Yeah.
Y'all been together much longer. So I just thought it'd be okay. And my kids would be there on my side.
Yeah.
Of course, if we could go back.
Yeah.
And of course, I think at that time, to keep it in perspective, we did not think that would be it was literally the blind leading the blind. We had not read a book. We had sure not gone to a church class. We had not gone to a seminar. We didn't know anybody who was trying to blend their family. So it was just like trial and error.
Yeah.
Pioneer, let's stumble forward. So we really thought it was a good idea at the time. But if we could go back, obviously, we wouldn't have done that.
No, we wouldn't have done that.
But it was.
Looking back now, it's funny.
Yeah,
and
it
the
is
kids
funny.
probably think it's funny.
It is funny now.
So,
Okay. A common mistake that I think a lot of people make is what I did coming in as a parent. Again, the perspective. You had 4 boys, and I mean they're great kids, but they're boys. And I remember Gina telling me once that it's like, finally, I've got a man that can kind of help me corral the testosterone in that family.
Yes.
And so I remember playing catch in the street with Nathan. That was another fun story. And just having going to eat dinner with Taylor. And he was saying, do you put all that grease in your hair? Because I put gel in it. We had some fun beginning times.
Yeah.
But I also was trying to be a dad.
Right.
And I don't think I would have done that. I'd have been more of a buddy, friend, favorite uncle type role first.
Yeah. Not starting the disciplinary.
No, and
so
would
early
let
on.
that take time.
Sure.
But we didn't know that at the time.
We didn't know that.
I just thought, okay, I'll play my
This is great.
role.
I've got some help.
Yep. You play your role.
Yeah.
But it doesn't work that way, does it, sweetheart?
No, it doesn't.
Why is that such a important piece that at the very beginning, when you blend, you've got to assume a different role, and it's not a mom or it's not a dad. That can come in time.
It's
but
to be their friend.
Talk about that for just a second.
Really, it's to be their friend, to let them know that you're not there to replace that parent.
Very good.
That you're there to come alongside them and be, their biggest cheerleader, and to be there for them, but not to be there to replace a parent.
Right.
And we've seen in families that let that natural progression happen. Then there really is then that friendship. Then it moves to a respect level. Then you can speak into their lives and them listen. But it's a natural progression. It doesn't happen overnight. It may take a long time.
Yep.
That's really left up, to the child.
That's a great point. It's not really the parent that determines the pace of the blending. You kind of let the kids do it, don't you?
Right.
And each child, depending upon where they're at in life, may adapt or not adapt, or they are definitely on different time intervals.
Yes.
I'm thinking of your youngest because he was very little. We bonded real quick at the beginning because he was only 2.
Right.
But maybe, I'm thinking of one that was more in the middle. It's like, whoa, you're not my dad, so I don't want to necessarily bond with you because that's almost going to make me feel disloyal to my own father.
Right.
And so it was a different set of circumstances. But again, we didn't know that then. So,
No.
But today would tell people what? Just let the kids determine the pace.
Exactly.
And then be more of a aunt or uncle at the beginning, and just let the natural authority kind of increase over time.
Right. As relationship comes
Yeah.
together.
Yeah.
You can't be intrusive with it. It's got to happen. And the same with the kids blending,
Yep.
your kids and my kids. It's like when we got out of the way and let them just kind of do their own thing, they were blending better when we weren't, in the room saying, oh, we're going to do this as a blended family or we're going to do that. They just kind of blended on their own, and we saw them kind of come together.
Let's talk about one thing that we did really, really good. Now that we've explained one thing we didn't do. We created, well, actually, it was your idea. I went along with it, family night.
Right.
Talk about that and talk about the different perspectives from the youngest, thinking it was the greatest thing growing up. But talk about that for a second, because
Right. Sure.
that was a very
Sure.
good thing we did.
Yeah, Monday nights were our family night, where that was, no plans that night. We were going to have a dinner. We were going to have a Bible study / leadership lesson, and then we all had a favorite TV program that we all watched together back then, which was called Seventh Heaven. So a lot of times I would make it a themed dinner, Italian night or, something like that, Mexican food night. And of course, I'd decorate the table and try to make it all themed. And that was a night that no other plans were made. Now, we know when they got into teenage years and then they had
Right.
sports and things, we had to kind of work around that. But we tried to, as best as we could, make that the night that we were all here together and to have our leadership / Bible study lesson, which they would gripe and fuss about that. But now they look back at it, and it's some of the funniest memories and fun memories they talk about. It's really funny to hear them now go back and talk about it. So
Yep.
that was our Monday night family night, and sometimes it felt like pulling teeth to get them all to be here and participate. But now looking back, we love hearing some of the things they say about it, and that they'll do it with their kids too one day.
Yeah, I hope so. Maybe they'll keep that tradition going. You never know. I'm thinking of my oldest that wanted to pull the prank. I'm sitting here. Back then, there were home phones that people used a lot, and our oldest kids had cell phones.
Right.
And so here we were ready to have an actual Bible point. So it's more of a serious time or
Right.
a leadership point, and then the home phone would ring. And I'd say, don't get up, let it go. If it's important, they'll leave a voicemail. We'll call them back.
Yeah.
It could have been 20 seconds later, phone rings again. Let it go, And then the third time, I'm like, goodness gracious.
What is going
Who's
on?
calling? And
Yeah.
then the giggles around the table, and it's my oldest son on his cell phone calling our home phone just to disrupt what's going on.
You teaching.
Me, yes.
It was funny.
And I look back now and just crack up that it would be so much fun.
Right.
So I guess you kind of roll with the flow, don't you? You don't don't take life too seriously,
Right.
and just
Because you were very focused and serious when it was that time
Well,
of
at
the
that
night.
time.
And the kids' whole objective every week, it seemed like, was to get me to laugh.
Yeah.
For them to do something to get me to laugh. And then you would sometimes, lose it and start laughing because you just are like, what? I put my hands up.
Yeah.
I give up. So, and then that's what they remember, along with the studies too. But
Right.
they remember so much of that because we had laughter.
yeah.
And it was fun.
We're now at the kind of the beginning part of summer, and so typical activities change.
Right.
School years are not the in
Yeah.
play. You've got some that'll take a vacation, some that, hey, we're gonna go see our grandparents, and there's 4 sets of grandparents. If you've got mom and a stepmom and a dad and a stepdad, and then
Right.
maybe the kids don't want to spend equal amounts of time with 4 sets of grandparents. They go, I got my friends, and I want to go to the swimming pool, or I want to take a vacation. In other words, you've got just a different set of activities in the summer. Talk for a second about how you co-parent during those months, and maybe what co-parenting even is for somebody that's learning that. And I'm thinking of there's different types of styles in co-parenting. You've got some that may get along, and others are like, oh, heck no, we're enemies. And then there maybe are some in the middle. But why is this so important if it can be accomplished, and maybe some different strategies of how to co-parent during the summer? What would
Well,
you say?
whether you co-parent well or you're not co-parenting well, you still have to get your schedules in sync and know when, the other parent's vacation time is with the child, and, when your vacation time is, and get all of those in sync before people go off, purchasing flight tickets and, planning vacations. So I think that's real important. You can never be too organized when that comes into play. Anything beyond that, I think the kids it's a good idea to have a family meeting and have the kids all put their input about what do they expect the summer to look like, what are some of the things they want to do, just to kind of get a feel of how the calendar is going to look, what are they going to be doing during the days, how many days are you going to have them versus the other parents, some are excuse me, out of town. So you've got to know how long that child's going to be gone. In my case, the kids were gone sometimes up to a month, 3 weeks to 4 weeks with their dad. So we knew how to plan around that and plan accordingly.
That's a good point, because as I've talked with lots of people now, the visitation, the child situation is totally different. Some you've got little kids, some are middle school, and then some are even adult and grown, and they've got their own families. You've got some, like in my case, we did the first, third, and fifth weekend swaps.
Right.
I've had others that say, I basically go visit my dad in the summer, which tells me that they don't even see him in the 9 months of the school year, but they spend all 3 months in some. So there's a gazillion different co-parenting styles or strategies that you try to, or that we've encountered other people do. I guess the big point that comes to my mind is to keep in mind it's always about the kids.
Right.
And put egos aside.
Sure.
It's not about your ex and trying to deal with this.
Right.
Because the kids don't want to be in the middle to begin with.
No.
They'll always love mom. They'll always love dad. And so it's important that both parties put behind any emotional or marital dialogue or issues of the past, isn't it?
Exactly.
Let's talk about co-parenting for a second. There are different types of roles that we see a parent play in the life of their child. And some are enemies and some get along. And talk about that for a second. And then let's talk about how they can coexist. Because the parenting relationship hasn't ended. Maybe their marriage relationship has ended.
Right.
Again, somebody's passed away and they maybe have a new spouse, or somebody's divorced and remarried. So, that marriage is dead, so to speak, but not the parenting. They still got to get along for the sake of the kids. So let's talk about the different types of roles that we see people play in co-parenting, and then we'll talk about maybe how they can improve that for the sake of the kids.
Right. It's always the best to co-parent for the sake of the child.
Yep,
if there's both parents still alive. Unfortunately, it doesn't always work that way, and the child is the one that suffers the most for that. It's never. You're never.
Why is that so difficult? You're exactly right. I mean, you might talk about your own personal experience, and I might talk about mine, but it's difficult.
Right, it is difficult, and if I could go back, I would do some things different. I wasn't
Like what?
Well. Be more patient, not get so angry over things. So, but it's always the child that hurts, that suffers,
Right.
not the other parent. So it's always better for the sake of the child to co-parent at least, in an amicable way.
Right.
And I know in my case, when we were doing if it was our weekend versus their dad's weekend, if there was something that child wanted to really do at their dad's, or grandmother was coming up, and it wasn't, and it was my weekend, I always believed in letting them do what they wanted to do versus what the paper said. If their grandmother was coming up and it was our weekend, of course I wanted them to go and be with their grandmother. What child wouldn't want to do that?
Right, no, good
So,
point.
so the papers are something to go by if you can't agree.
Right.
But you can always work around those for the sake of the child.
Yeah. Good
And
point.
vice versa. I just believe that it's not set in stone, but it's there in case you can't work around, if you can't come to a decision. So I always believed it was better to let them, if there was something special. I know there was a time when my oldest was living with his father and it was our weekend, but his youth group was doing something that was really important to him that he wanted to be a part of because he was involved in his youth group. Well, of course I wanted him to stay there. I missed seeing him when I picked up the other two, but it was important to him, and I wanted him to be able to go and be a part of that.
Good point. And in my case, I was just oblivious that co-parenting was even a good idea.
Right. Well, that wasn't a word that was
Well, yeah, we
a
didn't-
buzzword back then.
We weren't fighting. We weren't arguing.
nobody knew what that meant.
But it just, there was no effort to co-parent because
Yeah.
I didn't think it had any value, and she
Right.
didn't think of it. So we just kind of moved on and went our separate ways. So,
Right.
but it really is a good thing, isn't it?
It is.
And it's hard as it may be, especially if you're still enemies, which we don't want that. It's like you said, it's removing that, putting the kids first, because it's about them, and not using them as a pawn in a chess game, but to make sure co-parent, it's about the kids, whether
Right.
they're little, middle, or even adult children and on their own. Good. Let's talk about summer. We talked about some of the summer activities that kids quickly. I'm bored.
Yeah.
And because they don't have a schedule that they're, maybe
Right.
used to. So what are some ideas that can help that issue that comes up during these months?
Well, I know in between them visiting their parents, grandparents, whatever they're doing, vacations, there's so many kids camps now that we didn't have when we were
Right.
growing up, and even some of my kids growing up they weren't as many kids camps as there are now for them to do. But on the days that they're home, some things that I wish I would have done would have been something just as easy as teaching kids how to meal prep for when school starts. Let them
Good idea.
make up some menus for the school year so that when school does start, you've already got a lot of that decided, and letting them learn and be a part of meal prepping, maybe even going in the store and buying it. So
Good
a lot of
idea.
times if you let them take the reins and do some things, you'd be really surprised what they could do. I'm learning that with our granddaughter because I try to help do it for her, and a lot of times she just will do it, and I'm amazed at how good she knows how to do things without me having to show her every single step. So I think meal prep is such a great thing to let them do, and start making out their menus for the school year and helping actually get it ready and prepped and put in the refrigerator, and just letting them test run that in the summertime would be fun, because it's not fun to do when you're in the midst of a school year and you're moving along at a fast pace during the week. So in the summer when you've got time to do things, like, why not?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
you know what? You had another idea.
Right.
Christmas and holidays
Yes.
are very, very busy times.
Very.
You said something earlier
Yes.
today that I thought was
Yes.
very ingenious.
that
Talk about that.
I plan on doing with my granddaughter, because it's a project that we did not get to do at Christmas because it flew by so fast with all the events and things we were doing, and that's Christmas in July. What I'm doing is some of the crafts and projects that we were going to do then, we're going to do in July.
It's a great idea.
And then you can take it at such a slower pace and make a memory and have so much fun versus trying to just slop it up through it just for the sake of saying I got it done at Christmas time.
Right.
That we can do it in the summertime when she's bored, when my schedule's a lot less hectic, and we can have a lot more fun doing it. So I'm going to do some of those.
I'm hearing plan.
Right.
And be flexible, be flexible, be flexible.
Sure.
Good advice.
Yeah.
Good advice.
Yeah.
Good. What other thoughts do you have when it comes to the summer schedules? Is there anything else that maybe our listeners might want to think about? How do I navigate the summer months that come to mind other than what we've discussed up to this point?
I think the libraries always have so many fun things for kids to do that are free. The movie theaters, I know the one here in our town, show a lot of the old movies, the reruns, and their matinees during the day that are at a much reduced price. There's just so many resources now that we didn't have when our kids were, younger. So many, just so many things that they have out there for kids that are free or at a reduced price in the summer. So I know a lot of that is posted online. There's Groupon, that we didn't have. That it's just some neat resources now that, especially if you go on your city calendar, you can find a lot of those there.
And one idea that comes to my mind too, to give a new idea to those that are listening, is what we would call the 30-day experiment. A friend of mine, Mike, taught me this years ago. I try to model it, implement it in my own daily routine. Perfect to do in the summer. And it's simply stated as follows. You do one unselfish act for somebody else per day, and then you record their response. And it sounds so easy, just one deed, but we get so engrossed in our agendas and what we're doing and where I'm going that we might miss an opportunity that is right in front of our face during the day. And it makes the focus on looking and going out. How can I do some activity or good deed for somebody else? I think of Mother Teresa and something that was stated about her. She said, we get together in the morning, we pray, and then we seek Jesus, and then we go out in the streets and try to be like Jesus. I thought that's so powerful. So if we had the same thing, that you start your morning with your kids, your grandkids, you could do this with adult children. It doesn't have to be a 3 or 4 or 5-year-old.
Sure.
But we say, what we're going to do during the summer, we're just going to do one unselfish act, and then we're going to talk about it and what the response was.
Yeah.
And when you and I have done this, it caused me just to look for reasons to make people feel special, and it's something that could be a great time to do in the summer. That
It
comes
is,
to my
absolutely. Also brings to my mind cleaning out their closets, their toys,
Sure, just
anything
basic.
in the attic, and taking those to the women's shelter to donate. I know the one that we take downtown to Dallas always need donations for kids that are going to be staying there. So toys and clothes and anything like that in the attic, that's a good thing to do.
Those are some great ideas, especially for summer months.
Yeah.
We've got, I think it's be great to talk about where we would like to see our ministry go, and maybe for those that are listening and watching, where this all even came about to begin with. So after we blended our family, I think once you tell the story of when Denny called me, and then why are we even doing this to begin with, and then we'll share a little bit about where we're trying to go and what are we trying to accomplish, and maybe talk about some resources we've already created, but talk about why we're doing Blended Together Forever.
Well, when we married 23 years ago, there was nothing. No workbooks, no small groups, no Sunday school class, no books, period. Couldn't find anything. So we kind of just failed forward. And as the years, we got into it, I was going to school and having lunch with our kids. We had a day that we would come and have lunch with our kids at school, certain days for each kids. And I noticed, this was back when you could sit at the table with your kids. And I noticed that there were so many blended families. Most of these kids came from blended families. It was then the majority of what was sitting at the table. So I came home and I remember telling you one day, that is the majority of what's sitting out there, at school and also the pews at church.
Right.
So but there still were no resources. And God put it on our heart through, I guess, the very beginning when at our church, Denny asked us to speak. It was a Mother's Day, and that's a kind of a tough day for moms that are stepmoms because we don't know, where our place is when you're a stepmom.
Yeah.
So we had spoke that day at church
Right.
for Mother's Day, and God put it on our heart. At that point, I started, and we were kind of like, no,
Right.
no, thank you.
Yeah. Our pastor, where we were going to church, got me off to the side one afternoon and said, "Hey, Craig, Mother's Day's coming up, and Gina's a great role model for our church, and I have found out that 40% of the kids today are raised in a blended family." And he says, I've got this big issue or dilemma. When I say we'd like all moms to stand, well, does that mean the stepmoms stand? Do they not? And maybe one of the kids is looking at the stepmom and go, "You're not my real mom." So you've got all these dynamics. He goes, "This year I just want to do something different." I said, "Okay." And he said, "I want you and Gina to just share your testimonial on how you're making your family work." And so we did that. And of course, I thought that would be the end of it. But the Lord kind of nudged at our heart and saw this huge need and a ministry that needed to be created that we couldn't, at least at that time,
Right.
find anything anywhere. And you'd always said, we got to help the kids.
Right.
Obviously, we're thinking of our own kids. But then when our eyes were really open, we saw just hundreds, thousands of children that are in blended situations. And so after we felt the call to do this, we've created our first resource talk about that maybe for a second, for leaders that can really help make their families whole again, and maybe how that could be of some benefit to churches, schools, corporations, small groups, home groups, whatever.
Right.
Talk about that for a second.
So after it seemed like many years of God, kind of bringing this back around to us, and I didn't want to do it because number one, we had so much going on. Number two, I didn't feel like we had like a perfect type family that we could do this. But what I then began to learn is God doesn't want perfection. He wants you, in the midst of all of that chaos, of all of that may not be going well, to still trust Him and to still lead and do, and that it's okay for it to not be perfect, and it's not going to be perfect, but that He still calls you, even during those times, to move forward and help others. So then we decided we would do it, and so through much prayer and moving forward, we decided to do a 16-week workbook. So have come out with that for small groups and home groups and just in couples. You could lead it in your home, you could have it in your church,
Right.
and lead a group there.
Right, exactly. We're real excited about that. We've literally got a short 3-4 minute video that introduces each subject.
Right.
Then you've got a leader guide that's got scripture reference with all the answer key, and then the participant guides with basically fill in the blanks. So I know one couple that we talked with recently, they just wanted to do it with each other. So they got one leader guide, one participant guide, so it was just a husband and wife going to go through it.
Right.
I know that there's a mentoring session going on with 1-on-3. And again, like you said, it could be in a small group. Or we've got a lot of churches, we're hopeful and prayerful this fall, want to use it as a curriculum, at least offer it to their church as here's an idea, here's a subject with all the other programs that are offered. So
Yeah, we're excited about that.
yeah, so we really are. Couple other things that come to my mind just before we wrap up today. We talked about you've got to do something new in your blended family. In other words, we all come to the table and we've got history from a previous family, and we maybe had different traditions or different parenting styles. I mean, you can make a long list, and you then start to blend. The tendency is to kind of do what we've always done, but And though you can still honor the past, and you should, you've got to create something new for your family. Talk for a second, sweetheart. Why is that so important? That something that's about us and maybe some ideas that you've thought of, either looking back or going forward, and just for a second about, if you would.
Well, that's the part where when we blended that I made the biggest goof up is that was, going back to a vacation location where we had gone previously.
And you mean previously with your other husband?
Right, in our other marriage with our kids. Right, so it was easy to just say, oh, this was fun, let's go here.
Sure.
Well, that probably wasn't a great idea.
Right.
Thinking of some new things to do and always letting kids have their input. And I don't mean they get to make the decisions, but it's always good to have their input and their ideas and to hear what's in their heart and what they, what they would like to do. Not saying that that's what you do, but, to get their ideas and some things they want to do. Maybe things that we never would have thought of.
Right.
So going forward and having new places to go and discover, I think is always a good idea.
Yeah, it is. I remember Christmas was very hard for me.
Right.
Because when the Christmas tree would come out and get decorated, and I would see pictures of, your kids and their years growing up, that was just a natural reminder of what I had lost. You weren't trying to hurt me, or you were just trying to honor the kids. Well, this is where we were, and this is when you were 3 and 4 and 5. But for me, I looked at that tree, and it was a painful reminder.
Right. You didn't have all of those old ornaments that you brought with you.
I didn't.
I did.
And it was very tough. And so that's another good reason why you can still honor the past, but you've got to create new memories, new identity.
Yes.
And one of the things that I think was a God thing that helped us, we created our family verse, Joshua 1, verses 7 and 8, where Moses has passed away and Joshua is going to lead them to the promised land. And, where it says, this book of the law shall not depart out of your mouth. Meditate on it day and night. Don't turn to the left. Don't turn to the right. And he'll make your way prosperous and you'll have good success. We did not do that in our previous marriage relationship. So we said, this is, for however we got there, we camped on, this is our family verse as we go forward. And that was new.
Right.
I didn't do that in my first marriage. You didn't do that. This was strictly about us. And so there was a real pride factor. It's like family night, we didn't do, and so that was new.
Right.
And so it gives a blended family, it's an identity, isn't it? It's like something we can hold on. This is about us.
Yeah.
And this feels good. Now, I know there's still issues, but it feels good. And so we're going.
Recreated.
Yeah. That's why I wanted to make sure that you can still honor whatever you've done, but you got to create something new going forward, don't you?
And I remember at Christmas time, we had some grandparents that were wise enough to see that, hey, these kids, it's good to give them Christmas ornaments. So they were giving them Christmas ornaments each year at Christmas, along with their Christmas gift, to kind of start new traditions, new Christmas ornaments that were whatever sport they were in, if they were in band, if they, just whatever their hobbies and likes were, they started giving them those ornaments every year at Christmas, new ones to decorate our tree with, that would have the date on it and what that signified, whatever the ornament was, a cap and gown or their first car. I mean, things like that took us forward in life together and at Christmas. So that was really neat that they saw that was important to do.
Yep. In closing, is there any last minute ideas that you'd want to share? Think about that. I think for me, I'll start if you don't mind, and then you think about it.
Sure. Go ahead.
People have asked me, where do you want to go from here? And I've had friends say, Craig, I think what the ministry you and Gina are doing is phenomenal. The biggest challenge is that people don't know you exist. And we've just wanted to be faithful to take the next step. I think at the first we saw this burden of, oh my goodness, there's 113 million adults that have at least one step-family relationship.
True.
I've got a friend, his name's Carl, that said, Craig, you're going to have to make a case for marriage now, even with evangelical Christians. So many churches don't even have a marriage ministry, or they tuck it under kids or parenting, adult education, and you've got to take a stand. I said, well, I will, but I didn't know that. And when it comes to blending, and I get it, that some people are hesitant to address it because they think, oh, does that mean we're endorsing divorce and remarriage? Which I say nothing could be further from the truth.
Yeah.
God's plan is the only right plan. I mean, he had it planned where it's one man, one woman for a lifetime. Mm-hmm. But once that model's been broken, I've always thought, well, it's like a jar that shatters. You got broken pieces, but the broken pieces are lives. They get kids and grandkids and spouses and husbands and wives. Men, you got to pick up the pieces and you try to make the family whole again. Right. It doesn't look like it did. It's still a broken jar, but you're trying to put it together. And I think of my friend Rick down at a church in Corsicana when we spoke at his church, where he said, you know, Chuck Swindoll always said, keep the standard high, but expect imperfection because it's people. And there's people that are broken everywhere. And it's grace, grace, grace. So what do you want to see happen for the ministry going forward, sweetheart? And why is it such a need that churches need to, okay, let's take the blinders off. We need to help. You said earlier, they're sitting in your pew. Mm-hmm. You know, they're there. It's not like, oh, there's an isolated case over here or an isolated case over there. No, there's masses.
Yes.
I think we finished at least this podcast with why the need going forward, and your thoughts in closing.
Well, the number one is because the percentage is even higher in second marriages when you're bringing kids in, that the divorce rate will happen again.
So it's already bad first go around, but you're saying the second time is even worse.
Right.
Yeah.
Because there's even more situations with his loyalties to his kids, her loyalty to her kids, and that's where the clashes start. Mm-hmm. So we want to prevent that.
Amen.
You can work through it. It's hard, but it can be done.
Right.
And my vision for us going forward, we're now working on our book about our story, about how we went through, not how we went through our divorce, but, picking up from the feelings and what we were going through that, and then how we met, and just basically our story and some things that we went through. So after that, my vision is that we can help the kids. We can reach kids. Because even if mom and dad go to a marriage seminar, do a workbook, and help work through some of the situations and the problems, you still come home and you've got the kids. Their hearts are still hurt. They are trying to move forward, and they don't know maybe how to forgive. So what I see is us being able to reach out and help the adolescents on up, the kids, because they're included in this too.
Right. Very true. So you've got to stabilize a family.
Right.
And then you've got to prevent re-divorce in going forward,
Correct.
Don't you?
Yes.
That's the end of our first podcast. Thank you for joining us. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel and then follow us on our social media channels, Instagram and Facebook. Father, we are so grateful for the men and women and even children that are listening and watching these broadcasts. We pray a very special blessing over their blended family. Guide them, lead them, make they see resources and help as they go forward. Thank you for their friendship, and we give you all the glory through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.